Hello and welcome to the latest episode of ISJ Leaders in Security. Today I'm joined by Andy Watkin-Child, founding partner of the Augusta Group and former Group VP of Cyber Risk for Group Santander. Andy is also on the Register of Chartered Security Professionals, which is recognised by the UK Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure. Andy, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Hi Matthew, and thank you for inviting me along today to discuss cybersecurity with you. Before we start, may I say first of all how sorry that we're having this conversation with the issues that are going on with Ukraine and Russia at the moment, and the distressing impact that it's having on both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
Yes, it is, and as you mentioned, the conflict, perhaps an underreported element of that would be from a cybersecurity perspective. So, I mean, why are cyber attacks a threat to all sides in the conflict, and why should organisations be concerned?
Great question, Matthew. I mean, I think it's fair to say that in relation to the conventional war, cyber has been underreported, and I think we would expect it to be. Although I will say that in relation to other conflicts, cyber has probably been more reported than most. There's a lot of communications and conversations going on all over Europe and North America around cyber and the impacts of cyber in relation to this particular conflict. And it's probably, again, fair to say that it's the first time that cyber has actually been mentioned as an offensive capability within a war, openly mentioned. I think people should be concerned for a number of reasons. I think the first one is NATO recognises cyber as a sphere and domain of operation. And it has done, I think, since around 2016, 2017. To the point where a significant cyber attack on NATO countries could be used to trigger Article 5. So that's serious in its own right. I think the other reason we should all be concerned is we know that our cyber maturity across the West and NATO allies is not as good as it could be. We've seen over the last year to 18 months a lot of significant cyber attacks on infrastructure. Whether it's a Colonial Pipeline attack, whether it's a JBS Meat attack, whether it's the Deutschland oil attack from February this year. So we know that cyber attacks have been very successful, launched typically by nation states and their proxies. And those impacts have impacted, so those cyber attacks have impacted national infrastructure in terms of fuel, in terms of food production and distribution. So we know cyber can be used as a very successful weapon when we need to. And with the backdrop of a low level of cyber maturity, that creates a lot of concern. Yesterday we saw and heard of Toyota in Japan switching off all manufacturing following a cyber attack on one of its suppliers. So it's an issue.
Okay, exactly. So I mean, we hear a lot about the US and UK using its offensive cyber capabilities to target Russia. I mean, could you just tell us what does this mean and what could the potential impact be?
Yeah, certainly. So with NATO again adopting cyber security and cyberspace as a domain of operation, NATO countries and also Russia and China and non-NATO countries, have built quite significant offensive cybersecurity capabilities or capabilities to attack other countries, sitting alongside their conventional weapon systems, using cyber as a means of disruption and disinformation of the countries they want to attack, and that creates again lots of challenges because the Russians and their proxies have been known to launch cyber attacks and successful cyber attacks, as have other countries like North Korea and China and Iran quite successfully. And what that means is it puts those countries under attack, under an immense amount of stress, because the targets tend to be critical national infrastructure, whether that's oil, production and transportation, electricity, water, gas. It's proven to actually, to work quite successfully against infrastructure that's been targeted. And in the US, for example, that resulted in a number of executive orders issued last year for the United States to strengthen its cybersecurity posture, specifically across critical national infrastructure.
Okay, so who then might be the target of offensive cyber attacks on both sides?
I mean, that's a great question again. Cyber can be targeted specifically at an entity. It can be focusing directly on a given organization. Hackers can and will often do a lot of social engineering to identify their targets and focus directly down on those targets and look for weak spots in those organizations and launch directly. Or, unfortunately, you can have attacks like the NotPetya attack in 2017, which was a Russian attack on the Ukraine that then spilled out globally. And it was an indirect consequence. It wasn't targeted outside of a specific geography, but it just fed and bled outside of that geography. So it impacted, hundreds of thousands of companies across the world, and the cost was tens of billions in financial impact to organizations. So it's not really, it's a very difficult question to answer being specific, but I think what it does do is it tells us that if an attack takes place, and it comes back to your first question, if an attack takes place and it bleeds out, the real concern is that that attack causes more damage than it was potentially intended to cause. And then you get into a debate where, was this attack, it impacted NATO countries, and what happens under Article 5? And that really concerns me.
Yeah, as you said, it is a really concerning situation, and organisations will probably be sitting there wondering what they can do to prepare themselves for a potential attack. I mean, are there maybe 1, 2, 3 steps that organisations can take?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the US announced over the last 2 weeks what it's called its Shields Up program, where it's pushing out the message that organisations should focus on their cybersecurity and put appropriate protections in place. It's actually very difficult, given the maturity of where we all are and how many companies say there are, out there. The predominance of SMEs and our reliance on SMEs and supply chains is very, very high. But there are things that can be done quickly. The first one is make sure you identify all your assets, know how many IT assets you've got, where are your networks in terms of external networks into the organization. Do you know that? Do you know where they are? Do you know what information is moving in and out of the organization? And then start to focus on things like endpoint protection and vulnerability scanning, and then patching up to date. And then really at this moment in time, given everybody's maturity, is making sure that you've got an incident response plan is probably the most short-term and most effective remedial action you can take. So if something did go wrong and you did spot something going wrong, do you know what you're going to do? Are you going to switch your IT off and then bring somebody in, contact the insurance company and make sure your insurance company is on standby to help you out? Because as it stands at the moment, putting all the necessary practices and security controls you need in place is going to take quite some time. It's very expensive.
Thank you so much for your time today, Andy. That was fantastic. Really appreciate it. It's been great to speak with you. Thank you.
No, and thank you, Matthew, and thank you for asking me to come along and speak today. It's always appreciated.
Thank you. And please remember to catch up with the rest of the Leaders in Security series. Visit the International Security Journal YouTube channel